Hello, and thank you again for joining us for the Minnesota Homeless Studies Survey Training. This training will focus on how to complete the survey so that we can get the best and most accurate data possible. Before we begin, though, let's start with some general information. First, we will navigate some of the specific types of questions that you'll find in the interview, but we won't walk through the entire interview survey. The questions we've chosen for this training are some of the more complicated questions and are often where we see mistakes when we bring the data back to our office. So, after you watch this video, it's important that you practice once or twice, the whole way through, with someone that you know. This will eliminate mistakes during the night of the study. Second, when navigating questions, the basic rule of thumb is to read until you come to a period or a question mark. So, in some cases, you'll read the full question, wait for the respondent to give you an answer, and then choose the option that best fits, while other times you'll read the question plus all the response options. The interview is structured so that you will move from the left side of the page to the right side when there is a follow-up question. There are arrows that direct you to the follow-up questions, and typically those are enclosed in the same box as the original question. All interviewer instructions are in bold capital letters. Those are instructions that you read to yourself. You don't read those out loud to the respondent. Most of the answers on this survey are closed-ended so that you will simply fill in the circle for the answer that the respondent gives you. Please stay within the lines when marking the response. In some cases, you'll need to write out a brief answer when directed. We'd like you to use pencil to record your responses. Most sites will provide you with a pencil, but you should also bring your own as a backup. So with that, let's start on the first page of the survey. On the very top of the page, there's a box that says location code, name, and type. Typically, that will already be filled in with a sticker and you won't have to do anything. That will be true at most shelter sites, but if your form does not have that information, you will need to write in the name of the location where you're conducting the interview. The same is true for the county box below that. If it's not filled in, please record the county where you're conducting the interview. After that, please make sure you write your name at the top of the form along with the date and the time you started the interview. This is all very important information for our office to have. Then, read the introduction. If you're volunteering at a shelter site, which many of you will be, you do not have to read the first screening question. Are you currently staying in a shelter or transitional housing program? It's okay if you do read this question, but it's really intended to determine survey eligibility at our outreach sites. If you are volunteering at an outreach location, please ask the first screening question. If the respondent says no, they may still be eligible to take the survey. So please ask the follow-up screening questions.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Thalia, and I'm a volunteer interviewer. We're doing a survey of people who do not have a regular or permanent place to stay. We'd like your help. We're trying to collect information that will be helpful in creating affordable housing and planning other services. Are you currently staying in a shelter or transitional housing program, or are about to be evicted from your housing and have nowhere else to go?
No.
Are you currently staying in a place that is not a regular or permanent place to stay, such as outdoors, in a car or vacant building, a place of business, or a place that you received a voucher for?
No.
Are you currently doubled up with a friend or family member on a temporary basis because you have nowhere else to go?
Yes.
This survey is voluntary and confidential. We will pay you $10 cash for completing it. You don't have to be interviewed if you don't want to. Whether or not you do the interview will not affect any services you are receiving. No one will be identified in the survey. You don't have to tell me your name. If there are questions you don't wish to answer, I will skip them. Would you be willing to take the time to do the interview now?
Yes.
Thank you.
So if the respondent says no to that final question in the screener, then they are not eligible to conduct the interview. Thank them for their time and let them know that they are not eligible. If the respondent becomes angry because they do not qualify and will not get the cash incentive, or if at any point you feel that your safety is at risk, direct the respondent to the site leader. The next part of the introduction is where you remind respondents about the confidentiality of the survey. This is very important as we want people to feel safe and comfortable taking the survey. We do not need anyone to provide their name, and you can remind participants that they do not have to answer any questions that they don't want to. Next, you'll ask, would you be willing to take the time now to do the interview? Most people will say yes, but if they say no, thank them for their time and terminate the interview. Okay, let's start with question 1. I want to illustrate the basic concept of moving from a response category to a follow-up question. You'd start out by asking the question, last night did you stay with anyone else or were you on your own? Now sometimes respondents are confused by this question, but for our purposes, on your own means that the respondent is not accompanied by a friend, family member, or partner. They are literally on their own. This is an example of where you'd read the question, wait for the respondent to answer, and then fill in the appropriate response. If they say they were on their own, you'd fill in the on own response and then go to the next question. But if they say they were with somebody else, you would fill in the with others option, follow the arrow, and then ask the follow-up question. Did the others include a spouse, partner, or significant other? Any children age 17 or younger? In question 2, the idea is to try and capture an accurate picture of the respondent's last 30 days of housing. The numbers in each of the empty boxes should add up to 30. If their numbers do not add up to 30, try to go back one time and reconcile the numbers. If they still don't add up to 30 after double checking with the respondent, you can move on. Here is an example of how that would work in practice.
Okay, so in the last 30 days, including this one, how many nights have you spent outside in a car or a vacant building or some other place that's not intended for housing?
14.
How many nights have you spent doubled up in someone else's house, apartment, or room?
14.
And how many nights have you spent in a shelter or transitional housing program in the last 30 days?
5 or 6.
Okay.
So 5.
Okay. In a regular housing? In regular housing, not doubled up?
None.
Okay. In some other type of place?
None.
Okay. I've got a little more than 30, so I'm going to go back and just read the question again, and then you can just think about your responses. So in the last 30 days, including this one, how many nights have you spent outside in a car or a vacant building or some other place that's not intended for housing?
Yeah, I think that was 14.
Okay. How about doubled up in someone else's house, apartment, or room?
11, I think.
11. All right. And then in a shelter or a transitional housing program is?
Definitely 5.
Okay. All right. So that's good. Thank you.
Now we're going to go to the next page. Question 8 is a question about race and ethnicity. This is an example of a place where you would read the question as well as all of the response options. If they respond American Indian or some other group and then indicate that the other group includes American Indian, we want you to ask the follow-up questions starting with, what tribe are you mainly affiliated with? Now we're going to move on to question 15, which says, have you ever lived in a foster home? If they answer yes, then you would follow the arrow into the box and ask the follow-up questions. As a child, have you ever run away from a foster care placement? And did you ever leave a foster home because you were too old to stay there? And you'd select yes or no for each of these questions. Once you've completed the series of questions 15 through 20, you're going to ask the respondent, did you leave any of these living arrangements, meaning the arrangements referenced in questions 15 through 20, in the last 12 months? We've listed those facilities again in the question to remind respondents about the options. If they say yes, then you ask the follow-up questions. I want to go on now to page 12, question 46. The question reads, in the last 12 months, have you ever received any of the following public benefits? How about, and then you would read each question, A through G, and select yes or no, depending on their response. It is important to note that if all of their answers are no, you should still fill in each circle. Don't simply draw a line through all the responses in the no category. Our scanners will have a hard time picking that up. If the respondent answers yes to any of those items, then you'd ask, during the last 12 months, did you lose any services or benefits that you had been receiving? If they say yes, ask, what services did you lose or become unable to afford? Then you'd write the letter of that item in the boxes provided. Now we're going to jump again to page 14. This is the beginning of our veteran section. It starts with, have you ever served in the U.S. military? The format is the same as we've been discussing. If they say yes, you fill the circle and then follow the arrows to answer the questions on the right. If they say no, or they refuse to respond, then you go to question 55, which is on page 16. Let's go to question 55 now. This is our employment question. Again, you'll notice if they say yes, you'll follow the arrows to the right and ask follow-up questions 55A and B, and then go on to question 56. If they say no to being currently employed, then you ask, in the last 6 months, have you been laid off, terminated, or had your job eliminated? These questions would apply even if they had been working a temporary day labor job and had that job end. Then work down the page from there to 55D through G. One note about 55E, how long has it been since you last held a job? We have 3 boxes for days, months, and years. You only need to fill in one of those boxes. So if the person says they've been unemployed for 4 months, then you simply write a 4 in the months box. You don't need to put anything in the other 2 boxes. Finally, for 55G, you'll notice that we have spaces for you to record up to 3 reasons, and you can write whatever the respondent says. Now let's jump ahead to question 73 on page 20. I want to emphasize that in this interview we are asking questions that are sensitive, in that they ask about personal information that people may be reluctant to provide. I can tell you that we've had really excellent luck in the past with people completing this interview, but one of the things that is sometimes useful if you see hesitancy from a respondent or concern about the kinds of questions we're asking, remind them that these questions are all voluntary and that they don't have to answer any question they don't want to. We'll simply move forward with the interview. And sometimes that is all the relief that the respondent needs in order to go on and answer the question. But I just wanted to illustrate that the questions in this section are sensitive. For example, question 73, it asks, have you ever been physically or sexually attacked or assaulted while you have been homeless? Again, if a respondent seems to be anxious or uncomfortable, just remind them that they don't have to answer the question. I'd like to skip ahead again now to question 83. This is an important point in the survey where we ask respondents whether or not they have children 17 or younger. It is at this point in the interview where we often see mistakes, either in the count of the children or with questions not being followed correctly. So we ask, do you have any children age 17 or younger? If the respondent answers yes, you'd follow the arrows into the box and ask, how many of your children are 17 or younger? And then record that number. You'd then ask, what are their ages? And record those numbers in the boxes below. If they say they have 3 children, there should be 3 different ages recorded in 83B. Then you keep reading down the page until you get to question 86. Again, this is an important breakpoint in the interview. It's distinct from the previous question because we want to know now whether or not they have children with them. If there are no children present and they report that there are no children with them, you select the 0 option and then follow the directions to question 93. If, however, they have any children living with them, then you would go to the next question where you ask about the ages of those children. So if they said there were 2 children living with them, you would write the ages of those 2 children in question 87, and those are the children for which the rest of the questions apply. One thing that is sometimes a problem when we get the data back to our office is that we don't have matching ages between this question, number 87, and the previous question about children's ages, 83B. We would ask you to please reference back to make sure that the ages in both of those questions agree. Okay, let's move on now to page 24. This is where you ask, please remind me, are you 21 or older? If they are 21 or older, then you do not complete this section, and you go to the back page and finish the survey. However, if they say no, then you want to ask all of the remaining questions. Remember that some youth have children living with them, so in some cases you'd be completing the children's section as well as the youth section. So now we're on the back page of the survey, and in some cases you will have gotten to the back page sooner. For example, if the respondent does not have children or the respondent was not a youth. Once you're on the back page, you need to thank them for their time and say, I need to show Wilder Research and the study funders that I paid you for your time. Because the information you just gave me is confidential, I don't want you to give me your name. Instead, could you just give me your mother's first name? Some people are not comfortable giving their mother's first name because they feel like that identifies them. So instead, ask them for the name of their first pet. Finally, it's unlikely that you will actually have the cash incentive for the respondent. In most cases, you will refer them to the site leader, and the site leader will give the respondent the $10 for completing the interview. Follow whatever instructions were given to you at your specific site. After you've thanked the respondent and made certain that they've received their $10, record the end time of the interview and move on to the interviewer comments. You are the only one who has completed this interview, and you are the very best judge of what kind of a respondent this person was. So anything that you tell us to guide us in understanding the quality of the responses, that will be helpful as we make decisions about how to use the data we've obtained. After you've written your comments, please take a few minutes to go through the whole interview form and make sure it is completed correctly. If there's something you really weren't clear about, you can write a brief note in the margins next to the relevant question, and we will try to figure that out on our end. A phrase we often use when training interviewers is, when in doubt, write it out. Just make sure that everything is complete. This is a very critical step in the process. And finally, after you have watched this video and received your training materials, remember, practice, practice, practice. That will make the interview go so much more smoothly when you get to an actual interviewing situation. Well, that's the end of the Minnesota Homeless Study Survey training. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and for volunteering to help us with this study. We really could not do it without you. If you still have questions that the training video has not answered, please don't hesitate to contact Chris Lindberg or Karen Ulsted by email or by phone. We will try to respond as quickly as we can. Thank you very much.